Hello and welcome back to the introduction to ethics. And today we're going to talk about one of the two ethical perspectives we're going to cover in the test, and that's utilitarianism. At this point, we're at the body of the test. You can see questions E and F popping up. You already made your ethical question. You constitute the conflicting values in part D. That's something we covered in the previous video. And now you need to sort out the order between the two conflicting values. Which one of those values is more important than the other? The first approach is utilitarianism, and in the next video we're going to have a look at the second approach, and that's deontology. But right now, utilitarianism. How to crack the puzzle, how to make a decision between two important values. Utilitarianism uses one essential analytical formula, and that analytical formula is just a hard way to put this is their way to solve the puzzle. They're looking at it really as a formula. Because their definition of the analytical formula is that they need to make a calculation of pleasure and pain, or to put it differently, to calculate the balance of pleasure and pain given a decision. There are two versions in utilitarianism, named after two different people. The first version is an individual calculus of pleasure and pain. That's worked out by Jeremy Bentham, and the second one is a collective calculus providing the greatest happiness to the greatest number of people, and that's being taught out by John Stuart Mill. Now we're going to have a look at both versions, and then the first thing we're going to have a look at is Bentham. We're really having a look at Jeremy Bentham because he made a decision to stuff himself. So this is a closet at the university he worked, and this is really his body. It's stuffed like an animal. Unfortunately, his head wasn't preserved that well. Let's get back to the puppet. So that's why there's a wax hat on top of his body. This strange idea illustrates the core of his ethics, because Bentham is an individual guy. He just does something because it feels good for him. And that's it. He just makes a calculation. Okay, I need to make a decision. How does that work out for me? And basically that hinges on the idea that if everybody would make his decision like that everybody, the total balance in a society of pleasure is maximized. So it's the maximum amount of pleasure that a society can gain if everybody just serves their own interest. So how would that work in the mock test? The guy that's falling ill needs to make a decision whether to stay home, not being able to cover the expenses, or going to work, jeopardizing public health, infecting other people, possibly with the coronavirus. In that case, it would boil down to an overview like this. At the test, you can make a table like this. It's highly recommended. You put on top individual calculus Bentham. You make a choice. In your head, you're making a choice. Okay, let's see what happens if I don't go to work. And then you sum up what happens. Now, the pain side, you can see there's lots of stress because he might get into debt. He might have a lower self-esteem and shame towards his family members, where he feels he cannot provide to, and objectively he cannot provide. And the pleasure is that he has no guilt towards passengers or customers that might be involved. It's easy to see that in this case the gig worker in the utilitarianism, according to Bentham, would go to work, and that's a problem. In the version of Mill, it's you get to a different calculus, a different overview. Because he serves the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. That's his idea of making that calculation. Just before we proceed, it's important that his wife is known to have been of great help to John Stuart Mill. So this more popular version of utilitarianism, at least in continental Europe, is probably developed for a big part by the wife of John Stuart Mill, and not John Stuart Mill only by himself. Just to show you the contrast between Bentham, kind of individualistic or even egocentric guy, and Mill, who was living more in close cooperation with his wife. What's going on in this field of utilitarianism? There is something like the trolley problem. If you want to make decisions that deliver the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, you're actually doing something like this. You're still making hard decisions, because if there's a runaway trolley on the left side and it is about to kill 5 people, would you switch the lever in order to maximize the balance between pleasure and pain by saving 5 people and killing someone else who might not be suffering at all? This is a horrible decision, but it has some logic, because isn't it preferable, according to this idea of utilitarianism, that the most people possible are not in pain, and that the amount of payment total is minimized. If you want to have a clear illustration of this problem or idea, please have a look, if you have Netflix, on The Good Place Season 2, Episode 6, because it's well illustrated over there, and this is simply an introduction video. Let's get back to our gig economy worker, because there's no debt involved in an immediate sense, and there are no runaway trolleys crashing into people. The greatest happiness to the greatest number of people. How does that look like? Again, you draft a table, pain on the left side, pleasure on the right side, put on top the collective calculus of Mill. Still relying on the same choice. What happens if I don't go to work? Then you list all the factors that deliver pain, and that's where you can see the difference between Bentham. You add the numbers of people possibly involved, possibly infected by that pain. That pain is really calculated with the number. So if you look at the stress for yourself and the kids and the wife, then you put between brackets the number of people connected to that. If you see that there's some debt, then you put the number of people who need to live under that debt as well, and that shame towards family. You can see that it's just one, the guy that needs to stay home and cannot provide. And it's in sharp contrast with the right side, because no infections of passengers or customers. You might figure it out that, well, the least thing probably on a day of work is 10 passengers or customers. They are not infected. At least there's no risk that you're going to infect them if you stay at home. There is no reproduction of the virus from passengers towards other people. You know that there's a reproduction of the virus. One person can infect lots of people at a day. That's they're not infected as well, and you might even think of long-term damage to image as well. If you don't go to work ill, then there never will be a scandal of Uber drivers going to work or delivery riders going to work, infecting lots of people, causing lots of damage to other drivers that are becoming jobless because potential customers feel that it's an unsafe environment or an unsafe service. You can see that in this version of utilitarianism, you might think along the lines of the ethical dilemma. It's not really in the text itself always, but you can think of long-term consequences for lots of bigger number of people. In this case, just to conclude, the rider, the gig economy worker, would not go to work, would consider not good to go to work, because lots of people are being more well off, having more pleasure if the guy stays at home, in contrast than if he would go to work. But it comes at a price, and that's the prices of himself and the family. So it involves a bit of sacrifice. Like the guy is pulling the lever towards the track where he is on himself. So utilitarianism, if you live by it, sometimes results in partial sacrifice of yourself or individuals or minorities. And that's a downside to this ethics, or at least lots of people feel that it's a downside. You can see that in a test you are asked to make two different utilitarian analyses. There are lots of ways to do that, but my recommendation is to make at least one utilitarian calculus in the way that Bentham does, the individual version, and another one including Mill, the collective calculus. If you want to make variations to it, for instance, in some cases animals might be involved, or you might have a gray area where a family or friends might be reckoned or not. But I ask you to stay away from that, keep it clear for yourself, make an analysis on a totally individual basis, like Bentham did, and make a version of the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, like Mill did. That would be it for now. On behalf of Bentham and his nephew Mill, I thank you for watching. Next video, we're going to proceed with deontology.